We have repeating almost exactly, but very near, repeating triplets. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. 8 and 9 are together. Why are they together? Another similarity to the human genome. Because every long DNA sequence, for example, my nose, or my face, the nose, the eyes, the lips, the brows, is ended with a double stop, where the same or almost the same sequence of triplets comes 2 times at the end. This is how our enzymes know that the sequence has ended. The face is done, now let's go to the arms. Right? More or less. So that's an analogy. And this is, when then really I knew, and also our congregation, that this is something like a DNA. So, every single of these triplets has a teaching, has an event, has a doctrine, has a change of course of the Adventist Church. In any of these years that are listed here, happened something extraordinarily. Some events or some doctrinal changes have been good, like the midnight cry at the beginning of the judgment, like the foundation of the Adventist Church, like the great important Minneapolis conference with the teaching about righteousness by faith that was then abolished. And Ellen White said, 2 years later, after 1888, we could have been in heaven if the leaders would have accepted the teaching of Wagner and Jones. But not so. We have to walk a long time again in the wilderness to come back to that point where the righteousness of faith is taught again. And there's that absolute equal sequence you can find only as the second double stop codon at the end. In the years, what is it? 13, 14, 15. What happened in 2010 in the Adventist Church that made the first stop of depravation? Here, the spirit of prophecy died, and the church abolished the teachings of Ellen White. Here, we have a teaching about the last generation theology, which means that we have to vindicate God and God not us. We have to live Christian lives to show that the law of God can be kept and that God is righteous and not an evil judge. This man who taught that in these years, he was a pastor over 50 years for the Adventist Church. He was kicked out and without pension for his wife. He died in exile. Yeah? What was that? The human nature of Christ. The Adventist Church all of a sudden turned and took the human nature of Christ, teaching not anymore from Ellen White, who died here, but they did something else. Can you remember what that was? They said Jesus had an advantage. He was God. So from the definition, Jesus could not sin. He was never tempted like we. This is ecumenism. Go on sinning. You cannot other. Your nature is sinful, so sin. Jesus anyway died for you. You can do what you want. The Adventist Church with QOD accepted that false teaching. Paul says clearly in the Bible that Jesus had our human sinful nature exactly as we have it. Full stop. He was tempted in the same way as we are tempted, but he never sinned. a proof that we can live sinless lives. We can come to the state of Christ. And this is what the Protestant churches deny today. 68, 1987, 88, what was that? In 1986, we had the first ecumenical prayer. John Paul II called all Protestants and all churches of the world, inclusive Hinduism, Buddhism, all religions of the world, to Assisi, to pray for peace together. Wonderful thing. But all of a sudden, we have had the ecumenical movement in full-fledged in the earth, worldwide, and everybody was bowing in Rome to the Pope of Rome and his God, which is Satan. This is what happened to fulfill what was decided in the 50s, more or less here in the beginning, in the 50s, in the Second Vatican, 60s. It was 62 was the Second Vaticanical Council, to make an end of Protestantism. And just 27 years later, we had the ecumenical movement starting. It ended now with Pope Leo, as we found out. 2010, 2011, 2012, the first stop codon, what was that? A movement appeared. A movement to, in its final purpose, should end with all that false ways of the Adventist church and bring the church back to the message of righteousness by faith, so that the wilderness wandering would end. Wilderness wandering is nothing good, no? Without the prophet, without meat, without the pure doctrines of the beginning church. A degradation happened since 1915 latest. Since there, to be honest. Do you understand a little bit what I'm talking about? Can you imagine that all these things were foreshadowed by high Sabbaths? All these were the prophecies what would happen in the judgment time. And the judgment time is divided into two sections, also according to Paul. There would be a judgment of the dead, and there would be a judgment of the living. And what did we find out when we were in the 5th year of our movement, in 2014, on the 1st of February, here in this room? The trumpet cycle, that the judgment of the living had begun. We began the judgment of the living in the 2nd year of the identical triplet of 1888 until 90. Wow. That should give you a total wow. So we needed 5 years of study to come there, to have the change from the judgment of the dead to the judgment of the living. What does it mean for those that sit here and live? You are in the judgment of the living, prophesied by the Apostle Paul. You are judged not after your death. You are judged now. In the moment when you sit here, you are judged. What do you believe? What do you take away from that? Will you believe it? Will you sit in awe about the DNA that makes a true Christian? What does a true Christian believe? I think I summarized it. I summarized all these things in a short slide. What is the DNA of Christ? That's the same thing with the triplets, just the white moving years I took away. Yeah? So that's something like compressed. So soon it became clear that the HSL defined those doctrines that Jesus would bring into judgment. This is brought into judgment, what you believe. This is what you shall believe or perish. And check a person's belief according to those doctrinal characteristics. In 2012, we wrote a series of articles in the Gene of Life. You shall read it. You shall read this PowerPoint on our website that describes all the findings, how I did that. I cannot do that here. That's 6 hours of sermon. To come to that point to understand what these things meant. Then we wrote a free article series, The Gene of Life, on Last Countdown on our old website, emphasizing how a Christian believer can bring his spiritual DNA in unison harmony with Christ's DNA, what he would like you that you believe. In short, all this summarized, all these free articles summarized. And you can check yourself now out. You can judge yourself. A true Christian gives the midnight cry. Are you giving the midnight cry? Right now you give the midnight cry. Keeps the seventh-day Sabbath. Do you keep the seventh-day Sabbath? I hope so. You're here. Understands and lives by the principle of righteousness by faith. Do you know even what that means? We are saved by faith alone. But faith without works is dead, so you keep still the commandments even if you're spoken righteousness by faith. Believes in prophecy and keeps the sayings of the book of Revelation. Are we studying here since years the book of Revelation and find out which verses belong to which heavenly events? If you're here, you believe that. He vindicates God by living a life of testimony for Christ. Are you doing that? Judge yourself. Judge yourself. Are you vindicating God Father, following the principles that His Son, Jesus Christ, gave you in the Gospels? Are you doing that? Or are you just a Christian on the seventh day? Coming to church and then you go out and fornicate. That's something I cannot judge, but you can judge and Jesus will judge. Such a Christian understands that Christ had the same sinful nature as we have, as it is written in the Bible, and strives to abstain from sin, following the example of Jesus. This is what you do. You abstain from sin. You do not bring your workload on the Sabbath to the merchants, for example. He accepts and understands that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are distinct persons. There's a huge fringe of, no, I would not say fringe, there's a huge movement of Protestants that deny the person of the Holy Spirit completely, that he is a person. But Jesus himself points to him as a person. The Godhead comprises of three persons. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They are not the same person, but they are equal in purpose and character. They have the same character, they have the same substance, but not the same persons. So a true Christian, like we then, looks up to the heavens, searching for the signs that his redemption is near. He does not look only on earth or for his work. He looks up because Jesus said so. He fights the trifold mark of the beast, which you learned is the Sunday keeping, but one of the mark of the beast, trifold. The LGBT friendliness and endorsing homosex marriage would be the other. And then get vaccinated with the DNA of Satan would be the number test. So you would not do that. And you would fight the deceptions of the papacy and other false religions. You would fight against it. You would not say, hey, let's make friends. Let's make friends with papacy as they did in the 1986 with the ecumenical prayer for peace. Because it's so wonderful to pray together with the Pope, the Hinduists and the Buddhists and all the African demon religions, because we are all one and we are all praying to the same God. Jesus said, there is only one name given to the humans. Only one name can save. You cannot be saved by Muhammad, by Buddha, or by any other God. You can also not be saved by the Messiah of the Jews that they are still waiting for. And he has already come. At least you have to be a Messianic Jew. And then you shall not cling together the hands with Satanism, the papacy. So did you check yourself? Did you check yourself with the teachings of the 9 triplets of the DNA of Jesus? Are you like Jesus? When Jesus comes and brings you to the Father for judgment, will the Father see you? Or will he see Jesus in you? Will you have his DNA? Will you have that what he taught? Or will you believe Satan and deviate from the blueprint? That's in the judgment. Therefore, the foreshadowing of the high Sabbath began to unfold in the last days of the judgment since 1841, if you want so. Is this clear to you? Check yourself. The double stop. The last 6 years of the high Sabbath list. Like a human DNA, also the HSL ends with a double stop code, 2 consecutive triplets of those milestone triplets. These were the years 2010 to 2012 and 13 to 15. The years 10 to 12 made an end to the deviations of the SDA Church since 1844. And this was prophesied by Ellen G. White. She said there will be a movement that brings into the judgment all the deviations, all the sins that have entered the churches since 1844. This is what she said. And this movement came. And this comes at the last 3 years of wilderness wandering and the judgment of the dead. So, the high Sabbath Adventists were born preaching the Orion message with the corrections that Jesus intended, but they weren't heard. We were not heard. Right? You know that. Until today, we are not heard. So this was this triplet. The years 13, 15, the last triplet, is equal to the triplet of 1880, 88 to 90. This brought the beast coming up from the bottomless pit, and that was Pope Francis. Here, in this first year of the last 3 in 2013, Pope Francis was inaugurated. He was elected and inaugurated on the 19th of March. So, in 2015 began the next test in the trifold mark of the beast, the LGBT image test. So we had Pope Francis coming up. We had then 1 year of fighting against him, but in this year began the first trumpet to sound. And then we had 2015 when Obama proclaimed the homosex marriage over the US, the second beast. This was then the first fruit of Pope Francis, the homosex marriage over the whole world. And this was the end of the HSL. This was the end of the foreshadowing. This would come, and then the wilderness wandering would be ended. And then we would have again a movement on the earth against papacy that is truthful and has the full DNA of Jesus Christ himself with all the correct doctrines in their body. Remember, the Sabbaths, the high days, were a foreshadowing of things, while the body, we, is of Christ when we have that. So here the HSL ended, and so did the Orion clock. The Orion clock ended 2014 to 15 with the Yom Kippur of those years. Can you remember? Yes. So, and this showed that the investigative judgment had passed from the judgment of the dead, according to Paul, to the judgment of the living. Now would come a time of test. Are the living ready? 2 tests you know already. The LGBT test. Adventist Church fell completely in that test. They have now even homosexual leaders up to the highest ranks. And the test of the vaccination. Right? So, a time of test would begin from 2015 on. What is the judgment of the living? I have to resume many pages of written material into a few slides, just to give you the entry point to what I want to teach today.